Bruce Lee's name doesn't just create excitement, it creates certainty. The kind of certainty people use when they don't actually remember something. They only remember how it felt to believe it. And that's exactly where this story begins, because there's a fight that millions of people swear happened, even though the evidence is thin, the timelines don't line up cleanly, and the proof always collapses the moment you look closely. And yet, the rumor won't die. The rumor says that Ip Man, the quiet, disciplined Wing Chun master, once faced Bruce Lee, his most famous student, when Bruce returned home, too loud, too confident, too modern. The rumor says the student challenged the teacher, or the teacher tested the student, or the two clashed because Bruce had become something that traditional kung fu couldn't control anymore. It's always one of those versions, and the fact that there are so many versions is the first sign that we're not dealing with history, we're dealing with mythology. But myths don't form for no reason. They form because something real happened nearby, something emotional, something symbolic, something people needed to explain. And in Bruce Lee's story, there's one moment that always creates this kind of legend, the moment he stopped being a student and started becoming a force of nature. Because Bruce didn't just learn Wing Chun, he absorbed it, accelerated it, and then walked straight past its boundaries like rules were only suggestions. For a traditional world, that's not just talent, that's disrespect. Not because Bruce wanted to insult anyone, but because the old world often reads innovation as arrogance. Now picture Hong Kong in the late 1950s. Bruce is still young, still sharp-edged, still restless. He's training under Ip Man in Wing Chun, inside a culture where respect is not optional, where hierarchy matters, where the teacher isn't just a coach, he's a symbol. Ip Man isn't flashy, he isn't loud, he doesn't posture. His power is quiet. His reputation is built on something that doesn't need marketing: control. People around him don't just believe he can fight, they believe he doesn't need to prove it. And when you're that kind of figure, you don't win fights, you end arguments. Bruce, on the other hand, is the opposite energy. He's impatient, he's hungry, he's competitive. He's the kind of student who doesn't just want to know how to punch, he wants to know why punching works and how to make it work better. That mindset is powerful, but it also creates tension, because in the traditional martial arts world, some knowledge is given slowly on purpose, not just because it's difficult, but because the student is being shaped as a person, not just as a fighter. And Bruce was not the type to move slowly if he felt he could move fast. So here's the first truth you need to understand. Even without a fight, the ingredients for a fight story were there. You've got the calm master, you've got the explosive student, you've got a time period where martial arts schools guarded techniques like secrets, and you've got Bruce Lee, who would eventually become the most famous martial artist in the world, starting to step outside the fence. When someone like that walks away from tradition, people don't just say, he left, they say, something happened. And that's where the story starts mutating. Because years later, Bruce becomes Bruce Lee, the global Bruce, the movie star Bruce, the philosophical Bruce, the Bruce who talks about fluidity and freedom, and suddenly traditionalists feel like he's attacking them just by existing. And when your student becomes bigger than the system that trained him, the system has two choices. It can claim him, or it can fight his image. But since you can't physically fight a legend, people instead create a story where the legend was put in his place. Ip Man represented a world where the art reshapes the man, and when those two worlds collide, you don't need a ring, you don't even need a strike, you just need one question hanging in the air like a challenge: who is right?
Bruce Lee didn't just leave Hong Kong and grow up. He left and returned as a completely different kind of problem. Because when someone becomes famous, people don't look at them normally anymore. They look at them like a verdict, like proof that their way works, or proof that your way is outdated. And by the early 1970s, Bruce Lee was no longer a student from a Wing Chun school. He was an international symbol, a walking controversy, and, most dangerously, an innovator who spoke in a way that made traditional circles feel exposed. Not because he insulted them directly, but because his message was simple: if your art cannot adapt, it will eventually become a museum. And that's where the story tightens, because the legend of Ip Man versus Bruce Lee usually usually attaches itself to one specific kind of moment, not a public match, not a filmed duel, but a private encounter where something tense happened and then got retold. The rumor loves private rooms. Private rooms are perfect for myths. No cameras, no official record, just people claiming they heard. And in Chinese martial arts culture, that's all it takes. A whisper from a school, a sentence repeated at dinner, an old student telling a younger student, "You know what really happened?" And suddenly, it's history. So let's talk about the sensitive detail people circle. It's the idea that Bruce's success threatened traditional authority, and in some versions, that threat is personal. Some versions say Bruce was showing too much, teaching outsiders, breaking the code. Other versions say Bruce's confidence was interpreted as disrespect. And then there's the most dramatic version, that Ip Man, or his circle, felt Bruce needed to be checked, and that a confrontation happened to remind him where he came from. Now, here's the part people skip. Ip Man himself was not the type to chase drama. The man was known for being calm, for not performing, for avoiding spectacle. The image of Ip Man jumping into some emotional teacher versus student showdown feels convenient. It feels like what a movie would do. Real life tends to be colder. Real life tends to be quieter. And if there was tension between Bruce and the traditional world, it wouldn't need a fight to be real. It could have been a conversation, a refusal, a cold welcome, a disappointed silence. Those things can sting more than any punch. And Bruce, despite the legend of him being arrogant, was also the type to crave acknowledgement from his roots. People forget that. They forget that even rebels want respect, especially from the people who made them. Bruce could argue against tradition, but he still carried it. You can hear it in how he speaks. You can see it in how he moves. Wing Chun never left his body. It just evolved into something else. So imagine Bruce stepping back into Hong Kong as a star. Imagine him wanting to visit the old circles, to show he hasn't forgotten, to feel that quiet nod of approval. And imagine walking into a room and realizing the energy is off. Not celebration, not pride, something like distance, something like you left and now you're too big. That kind of moment can become a myth engine, because if Bruce felt rejected, he'd talk about it in his own way. If students felt jealous or defensive, they'd talk about it in their own way, and each group would reshape the story until it matched their emotional needs. This is where another rumor enters, and it's the rumor that feeds the main rumor like gasoline. The idea that Bruce was forced out of certain circles because of politics, not political politics, kung fu politics, the kind where teachers compete for students, reputation, legitimacy, the kind where teaching the wrong people can make you enemies. Bruce's entire career was basically a grenade thrown into that world. He taught openly.
He mixed ideas. He refused to claim one pure style. And to traditionalists, that can look like betrayal. So people start saying they were angry with him. Then someone else says they confronted him. Then someone else says they tested him. And then the internet does what it always does. It turns the emotional truth into a physical event. Because the internet doesn't spread awkward tension. It spreads fights. Now, a lot of fans point to the proof that's always floating around. Alleged photos, alleged clips, alleged stories that say this is the moment. But the problem is, when you trace these claims back, the details usually disintegrate. The clip is from a different event. The photo is of different people. The witness story changes depending on who's telling it. And the most revealing thing? The supposed fight is never described the same way twice. One version says Bruce attacked first. Another says Ip Man warned him. Another says it was a light sparring session. Another says it was a humiliating lesson. Another says it never happened but could have. That inconsistency is a fingerprint. It tells you the story's being produced by imagination, not documented reality. But that doesn't mean there was no spark, because there is something real that could explain why people feel like something happened, and that something is philosophy. Bruce's philosophy was not just martial arts talk. It was a direct challenge to identity.
When Bruce says, absorb what is useful, reject what is useless, he's not just giving advice. He's telling you not to worship systems. And if your life is built on worshiping a system, teaching it, defending it, protecting its status, then Bruce's words feel like an attack, even if he never meant them personally. Ip Man's world was not built on personal expression. It was built on discipline, structure, lineage, respect, patience. Those values can produce greatness. Bruce's world was built on adaptability, experimentation, freedom, evolution. Those values can also produce greatness. But when you put those two worlds in the same room, the fight can happen in silence. It can happen in one look. It can happen in what is not said. So here's the most realistic version of what could have happened. Not a legendary duel, but a complicated meeting. A reunion where the teacher is older, the student is famous, the room is full of pride and resentment and nostalgia. A moment where Bruce realizes he's no longer simply one of them. He's now something separate. And the traditional world doesn't know whether to celebrate that or punish it. And if you've ever been in a room where someone silently disapproves of you, you know what that does. It eats at you. It makes you want to prove yourself. It makes you replay the moment in your head. It makes you tell the story later with a little more edge. And that's how myths are born. One person tries to explain an uncomfortable moment, another person adds drama, and soon the audience demands a punchline, so the story becomes a punch. Now, there's one more key detail that makes this rumor feel even more believable to fans: the idea that Bruce Lee was untouchable, and the only person who could ever truly challenge him would be his own roots. That idea is emotionally perfect, it's poetic, it's cinematic, it's the kind of story humans love. The student becomes a dragon, but the only one who can still control the dragon is the master who raised it. But the truth is, the real conflict wasn't control, it was ownership. Who owns Bruce Lee? The Wing Chun world that trained him? The Hollywood world that celebrated him? The Jeet Kune Do world that he created? The fans? The myth makers?
Bruce Lee's life has a strange pattern. The more famous he became, the more people tried to solve him with a fight. Like if they could place him in a violent moment, they could finally decide what he really was: genius or fraud, innovator or showman, student or traitor. And that's why the Ip Man rumor doesn't exist alone. It clings to other stories, real stories, half-real stories, stories with witnesses but no clean proof, and it borrows their energy. Because once a rumor attaches itself to something that feels historically solid, it starts sounding like a fact. And there is one story in Bruce Lee's timeline that acts like a magnet for this: the private challenge story, the one people argue about endlessly, the one that has just enough smoke to keep the fire alive. A fight behind closed doors, a challenge match, a test that supposedly changed Bruce's thinking and pushed him toward Jeet Kune Do. Some versions call it a rooftop fight, some call it a school challenge, some say it lasted minutes, some say it was short but messy. Some claim Bruce won but was dissatisfied. And because this story exists in the same myth zone as Ip Man versus Bruce, the internet does what the internet does best: it merges them. Here's how the merge usually happens. People say, Bruce had a secret fight that changed everything. That part feels believable because Bruce did evolve rapidly and did talk about learning from real pressure. Then they say that fight involved traditionalists who were angry at him. That also feels believable because kung fu politics were real. Then, because the human brain loves one clean villain, they say, and that anger leads back to Ip Man's circle. And from there, it's only one small emotional leap to, so Ip Man confronted him. Boom, myth completed. But if you slow down and look closely, you can see the seams where the rumor is stitched together. First, Bruce's evolution toward Jeet Kune Do wasn't triggered by one magical fight alone. It was triggered by America, by boxing influence, fencing influence, by teaching, by sparring with different body types, by realizing that the world is bigger than one style. That's a long process. The myth tries to shrink it into one dramatic moment because long processes aren't viral. Second, even if Bruce had private challenge matches, and it's very plausible he did, that doesn't automatically connect to Ip Man personally. Schools had rivalries, students had egos, teachers had politics.
But to jump from Kung Fu world tension existed to Ip Man fought Bruce is like saying there were arguments in a city, so the mayor must have fist-fought a citizen. It's a satisfying story, but it's not the most likely one. Third, the most revealing clue is this. The Ip Man rumor always portrays Ip Man in a way that serves the storyteller's emotional goal. If the storyteller wants tradition to win, Ip Man humbles Bruce. If the storyteller wants Bruce's genius to shine, Ip Man acknowledges Bruce's growth. If the storyteller wants drama, it becomes a full clash. And whenever a story changes shape depending on what the teller needs, you're not watching history, you're watching a mirror. Now let's go deeper, because there's a reason this rumor became so popular in modern times, and it's not only because of martial arts fans, it's also because of movies.
Bruce Lee's life has a strange pattern. The more famous he became, the more people tried to solve him with a fight. Like if they could place him in a violent moment, they could finally decide what he really was: genius or fraud, innovator or showman, student or traitor. And that's why the Ip Man rumor doesn't exist alone. It clings to other stories, real stories, half-real stories, stories with witnesses but no clean proof, and it borrows their energy. Because once a rumor attaches itself to something that feels historically solid, it starts sounding like a fact. And there is one story in Bruce Lee's timeline that acts like a magnet for this: the private challenge story, the one people argue about endlessly, the one that has just enough smoke to keep the fire alive. A fight behind closed doors, a challenge match, a test that supposedly changed Bruce's thinking and pushed him toward Jeet Kune Do. Some versions call it a rooftop fight. Some call it a school challenge. Some say it lasted minutes. Some say it was short but messy. Some claim Bruce won but was dissatisfied. And because this story exists in the same myth zone as Ip Man versus Bruce, the internet does what the internet does best. It merges them. Here's how the merge usually happens. People say Bruce had a secret fight that changed everything. That part feels believable because Bruce did evolve rapidly and did talk about learning from real pressure. Then they say that fight involved traditionalists who were angry at him. That also feels believable because Kung Fu politics were real. Then, because the human brain loves one clean villain, they say, and that anger leads back to Ip Man's circle. And from there, it's only one small emotional leap to so Ip Man confronted him. Boom, myth completed. But if you slow down and look closely, you can see the seams where the rumor is stitched together. First, Bruce's evolution toward Jeet Kune Do wasn't triggered by one magical fight alone. It was triggered by America, by boxing influence, fencing influence, by teaching, by sparring with different body types, by realizing that the world is bigger than one style. That's a long process. The myth tries to shrink it into one dramatic moment because long processes aren't viral. Second, even if Bruce had private challenge matches, and it's very plausible he did, that doesn't automatically connect to Ip Man personally. Schools had rivalries, students had egos, teachers had politics. But to jump from Kung Fu world tension existed to Ip Man fought Bruce is like saying there were arguments in a city, so the mayor must have fist-fought a citizen. It's a satisfying story, but it's not the most likely one. Third, the most revealing clue is this. The Ip Man rumor always portrays Ip Man in a way that serves the storyteller's emotional goal. If the storyteller wants tradition to win, Ip Man humbles Bruce. If the storyteller wants Bruce's genius to shine, Ip Man acknowledges Bruce's growth. If the storyteller wants drama, it becomes a full clash. And whenever a story changes shape depending on what the teller needs, you're not watching history, you're watching a mirror. Now let's go deeper, because there's a reason this rumor became so popular in modern times, and it's not only because of martial arts fans, it's also because of movies.
The Ip Man film series created an image of Ip Man that is larger than real life. The real Ip Man was respected, yes, but cinema turned him into a mythic hero who defeats anyone, stands for culture, stands for honor, stands for the old world. Meanwhile, Bruce Lee is already a mythic figure in pop culture. So when both myths exist at the same time, people naturally ask, if two legends exist in the same universe, how can they not collide? That question is not historical, it's cinematic. It comes from story logic, not real logic. And once the movie image becomes stronger than the real person, the internet begins treating the movie version as evidence. People start confusing timelines, confusing events, confusing characters. They watch a scene of Ip Man defeating someone, and then they mentally place Bruce into that slot because it feels inevitable. That's how myth works. Your brain edits reality to create a satisfying arc. Now, here's the most dangerous part of all. Sometimes the rumor hides behind a softer claim to stay believable. Instead of saying they fought, it says they sparred. Instead of saying Bruce was destroyed, it says Bruce was tested. Instead of saying Ip Man was angry, it says Ip Man was disappointed. These softer versions are harder to disprove because sparring can be private, testing can be subtle, disappointment can be silent. And that's exactly why they spread. They sound reasonable while still giving you the thrill of a secret moment. So let's talk like a storyteller, but also like someone who's actually trying to locate truth. If Bruce had returned and met Ip Man in his later years, what would it most likely look like? It would not look like a dramatic duel. It would look like a quiet visit, a respectful meeting, an older teacher, a famous student, a short exchange, maybe a few movements, maybe a light touch, maybe nothing physical at all. And if Bruce had been in that room, the real impact wouldn't be bruises, it would be emotion. Because fame doesn't protect you from feeling like a child in front of your teacher. And that's what Part 3 is really about, the psychological fight the internet keeps turning into a physical one. Because Bruce Lee's biggest conflict wasn't with Ip Man, it was with the idea of limitation, the idea that you must stay inside a box, the idea that you must respect tradition by never questioning it. Bruce's entire life was one long refusal to stay small, and that refusal automatically creates enemies. Not enemies who want to kill you, enemies who want to shrink you back down. So when the rumor says Ip Man humbled Bruce, what it's really saying is someone somewhere had the authority to shrink him. And fans love that because it makes the world feel balanced again. It makes the legend feel controllable. It makes the story feel complete. But what if the real story is more painful than that? What if the real story is that no one won? What if the real story is that their world simply drifted apart? That the teacher remained rooted in tradition, the student became a new philosophy, and the gap between them couldn't be bridged by a punch or a bow?
Bruce Lee and Ip Man don't need a recorded fight to be locked together forever, because their relationship became a symbol. And symbols don't die when facts are missing. Symbols survive because people keep using them. That's the real reason this fight that never happened refuses to disappear. It isn't surviving on evidence, it's surviving on emotion. It's surviving because every generation of martial artists eventually reaches the same crossroads, and they want an answer that feels final. They want a story where someone wins, someone loses, and the argument ends. But real life didn't give them that, so the rumor fills the gap. Because the truth is, the Ip Man versus Bruce Lee story is not really asking who would win, it's asking who was right. It's asking whether martial arts should be protected like a sacred thing or treated like a living thing. It's asking whether respect means obedience or whether respect can include questioning. And when people can't resolve those questions in their own lives, they project the conflict onto two men who represent opposite sides of the same world. Ip Man represents the idea that a system can shape you into something sharp, disciplined, controlled. The slow craft of mastery. the quiet patience, the belief that you earn knowledge with character, not just talent. The idea that if you keep polishing one blade long enough, it becomes unstoppable. Bruce represents the idea that if you cling to one blade too long, it becomes a prison. That truth is not an insult to tradition, it's a warning to ego. Bruce believed the art should serve the person, not the person serve the art. And that belief is explosive inside any tradition, because tradition often survives by being treated as untouchable. So when people say Ip Man fought Bruce, what they're really trying to do is force a verdict on that argument. If Ip Man wins, tradition wins. If Bruce wins, evolution wins. If it's a draw, the story becomes less satisfying, so the internet usually doesn't choose that option. The internet wants a clean ending, like a movie. That's why the rumor always tries to become physical, because if it stays psychological, it stays unresolved. Now look at the timelines and the human reality underneath them. Ip Man was older, his health declined in his later years. Bruce was rising fast, living at a violent pace, training hard, filming hard, pushing his body and mind to extremes. Their worlds were not aligned for a dramatic showdown. Even if Bruce visited, even if there was tension, it would more likely be the kind of encounter that leaves you with a heavy feeling, not a bruise. A feeling like you're being judged, a feeling like you're no longer one of us, a feeling like you've changed so much that returning home doesn't feel like home anymore. And if that happened, here's what's heartbreaking. Both sides could walk away feeling disappointed for opposite reasons. The teacher's world could feel that the student had become too modern, too loud, too public. The student's world could feel that the teacher's circle couldn't see beyond tradition, couldn't celebrate growth unless it stayed inside the old shape. And that is exactly how relationships break in real life, quietly, without a final explosion, without a single moment you can point to, just distance, just drift, just a widening gap that no one knows how to close.
But the human mind hates drift. Drift feels meaningless. Drift doesn't go viral. Drift doesn't give you a clip to replay. So the myth supplies the missing scene, a confrontation, a test, a teacher's warning, a student's arrogance, a fight that restores order, a fight that makes the ending satisfying. And then the myth spreads because it's emotionally useful. It's useful to traditionalists who want to say, no matter how famous you become, the roots are stronger. It's useful to Bruce fans who want to say, even the old masters recognized his greatness. It's useful to internet commenters who want a debate that never ends. It's useful to content creators who want a title that explodes with clicks. And that's the most uncomfortable truth. This rumor is profitable. It generates attention, it generates arguments, it generates identity. People don't just believe it, they use it. And here's the final twist that makes the whole legend almost ironic. Even if Ip Man and Bruce Lee never exchanged a single real strike, their philosophies did collide. Their collision happened through influence, through evolution, through legacy. The art Ip Man taught became the seed. The world Bruce created became the wildfire. And whether people like it or not, both are now inseparable in martial arts history. Ip Man's name is carried around the world partly because Bruce Lee carried Wing Chun out of its small circle and into global imagination. And Bruce's physical foundation, his centerline obsession, his economy, his sensitivity, was shaped by Wing Chun training and the culture around Ip Man. In that sense, the fight already happened, not in a room, in the evolution of martial arts itself. Because every time a fighter chooses efficiency over tradition, Bruce is in the room. And every time a fighter chooses discipline, patience, structure, lineage, Ip Man is in the room. And when those two instincts clash inside one person, when someone asks, should I stick to my style or adapt, that's the real Ip Man versus Bruce Lee fight. It happens every day, inside gyms, dojos, and mirrors. So the next time someone swears with full confidence, bro, they definitely fought, here's the honest response. Maybe they didn't need to. Maybe the world just needed them to, because the world needed a story that could settle an argument that real life refuses to settle. The argument between tradition and freedom, between staying loyal and moving forward, between honoring the past and escaping it. And that's why this fight that never happened still feels real. Because the moment you train, you step into it. And whether you realize it or not, you're choosing a side every time you move.